Welcome to Debt Matters. Today, we're looking into the legal maze surrounding payments in the construction industry. It's a big deal for anyone involved, really, whether you're managing the money going out or you're the one needing to get paid on time. Understanding these steps, these deadlines, it's absolutely fundamental.
It really is. Because if you miss a beat, you could end up paying for work that's just not right, simply because a deadline passed.
Yeah.
Or, conversely, not getting paid what you're owed. And the whole system we're talking about, it stems mainly from the Housing Grants, Construction and Regeneration Act, the HGCRA from '96,
Yeah.
and then some tweaks made by the LDDC Act in 2009.
Right.
The point is, these laws set up a really strict framework. It's all about specific notices, payment cycles set by law, and crucially, deadlines you just can't miss.
So, our aim here is to walk you through that essential sequence of notices. We want to make clear the steps you have to follow to ensure payment certainty. You need to know when to communicate, how, and why, because getting it wrong can be, financially painful. Let's kick off at the start. The whole payment process usually gets going when a contractor or maybe a subcontractor sends in their claim for what they think they're due. That's the application for payment, the AFP.
Exactly, the AFP. And that document, or sometimes just the contractually agreed payment due date itself, it basically starts a clock ticking for the paying party. And their first mandatory step, they have to issue what's called a payment notice.
Okay, a payment notice, what does that need to say? How fast do they need to get it out?
Well, it's got to be specific. Two main things. First, the actual amount of money the payer intends to pay. And second, the detailed reasoning, the basis for how they calculated that amount.
Detailed basis. What does that mean in practice? Just saying less £10 K for delays.
No, not quite. The courts expect more. You need to show you're working, basically. Refer back to the work scope. Point to contract clauses, quantify the adjustments properly, not just a vague disagreement. And the timing, this is critical. It has to be issued within 5 days of the payment due date set out in the contract.
5 days. That sounds incredibly short, especially if you're dealing with a complex valuation on a big project.
It is short, and that's kind of the point, I think. It forces everyone involved, project managers, finance teams, to be on the ball, to be proactive. And here's another twist. Even if the contractor, say, forgot or was late sending their AFP, the paying party still has that legal obligation. They must issue that payment notice within those 5 days regardless.
Hold on, let me just clarify that. Why does the payer have to state an intended payment amount if they haven't even received a claim or an invoice yet? That seems counterintuitive.
Think of it as a mandatory communication step required by the law itself. It's almost like an internal check the law imposes on the payer. Like filing your tax return by the deadline, whether you got a reminder or not. The legislation puts the onus on the paying party to establish and communicate what they believe is due at that point. If they don't send that payment notice, they immediately put themselves at risk. They lose control over setting the initial valuation.
Okay, right. That makes sense. So, let's move to the next stage. What if the paying party sends out that initial payment notice, maybe agreeing to pay, say, £100,000, but then a few days later, they discover a serious issue, maybe a defect or something major wasn't actually finished. They now think they should pay much less. They've already issued the payment notice saying £100 K. Are they stuck with that? Can they just change their mind?
Yes. They can change the figure, but only through one specific legally defined route. This is where the payer gets their second chance. Their main defense mechanism, really. It's the pay less notice, or PLN. This is the only way they can lawfully decide to pay less than the amount they stated in their own earlier payment notice. Or, importantly, less than the amount the contractor claimed in their AFP, especially if the payer missed sending that initial payment notice altogether.
So the pay less notice effectively overrides the previous figure.
Precisely. It trumps whatever figure came before, whether it was in their own payment notice or the contractor's AFP. But, and this is a big but, only if the PLN itself is done correctly. And again, like the payment notice, it has to state the new, lower amount they intend to pay, and crucially, the detailed calculation showing how they got to that new figure.
And the timing on this one, is it just as tight?
Even more critical, perhaps, because it's the last chance saloon for the payer. The Payless notice absolutely must be served at least 7 days before the final date for payment.
At least 7 days before. Not 6, not 5. Minimum 7 days.
Exactly. That deadline is non-negotiable. Missing it by even 1 day, serving it 6 days before instead of 7. That's often fatal to the payer's position on that payment cycle.
Wow. I can just picture the scramble. Trying to assess a complex defect, get the numbers right, get legal to sign off. all within that window before the 7-day cutoff. It sounds intense.
It is intense. And frankly, the courts tend to have very little sympathy if it's just down to administrative errors or delays. I mean, you hear about cases where huge sums were at stake, but the defense failed because the payless notice got stuck in someone's outbox or was sent a day late. That simple procedural slip means the payer has to pay the previously notified amount.
That feels quite harsh. Are there no exceptions? Like, what if there was clear evidence of fraud or a really massive breach of contract discovered just before the deadline? Would a judge not allow some flexibility then?
Well, fraud is always a different category and would be dealt with separately, of course. But for general valuation disputes or defects found late, the courts are very disciplined in applying the act. The whole point of this legislation is to ensure cash flow keeps moving and provide certainty. So, if the payer misses that pay less notice deadline, the obligation to pay the previously established amount, the notified sum, becomes fixed for that cycle. They might be able to argue about the true value and try to recover money later, maybe through adjudication or court, but the immediate requirement is to pay the notified sum first. Procedure trumps substance at this stage.
Right. So that brings us neatly to the consequences. You mentioned the notified sum. Let's unpack that. What happens financially if that payless notice deadline is missed, or if the initial payment notice wasn't sent on time? How bad is the damage from a simple administrative mistake?
This is really the core financial risk the legislation creates for payers. We arrive at this concept of the notified sum. Essentially, if the payer fails to issue either the payment notice or the later pay less notice correctly and on time, then the amount stated in the contractor's original application for payment, their AFP, generally becomes the amount legally due. That amount is the notified sum.
So basically, silence or lateness equals agreement for that payment cycle. If you don't object properly following the rules and timelines, you forfeit your right to dispute the contractor's claim amount right then and there. You have to pay it.
That's pretty much it. The paying party is then legally required to pay that notified sum by the final date for payment. It really hammers home the principle of the HGCR Act. Follow the procedure, meet the deadlines. If you don't, you pay first and argue about the valuation later. It completely shifts the immediate financial power to the party waiting for the payment.
Okay, now this is where it gets highly relevant for the contractor side. Let's say they've done everything right. Maybe the payer missed a notice and a notified sum is established. But then the final date for payment arrives and the money doesn't show up. What muscle does the contractor have then? They can't just wait months for litigation, can they?
No, they don't have to. The legislation gives them a powerful tool, the statutory right to suspend performance for non-payment of a notified sum. This is a fundamental right baked into the Act. It's there to stop contractors effectively bankrolling projects when the payer hasn't followed the payment rules.
Suspending work, that sounds like a serious step. How does a contractor use that power legally? You can't just tell the crew to down tools tomorrow, presumably.
No, procedure is key here too. To legally exercise this right, the contractor has to first issue a formal notice of intention to suspend performance. They have to warn the payer. And guess what? There's another strict timeline attached. The contractor must give the payer 7 days' notice before they actually stop work or suspend their services.
Ah, another 7-day window. So that notice basically fires a warning shot across the bows. It gives the payer one last week to sort out the payment before the site grinds to a halt.
Exactly. It creates this high-pressure window for negotiation or, more accurately, for payment. The payer knows that if that notified sum isn't paid within those 7 days, the project stops. And the consequences of suspension can escalate quickly for the payer. Not only the delays, but if the contractor suspends correctly, they're usually entitled under the Act to claim reasonable costs they incur because of the suspension. Things like demobilization, standing time, and then remobilization costs when payment eventually arrives.
So the financial penalty for not paying that notified sum can grow rapidly.
It certainly can. It makes sorting out the payment often the most sensible financial option for the payer, even if they still dispute the underlying value.
Looking at this whole chain, the AFP starting things off, the quick 5-day payment notice, the 7-day deadline for the pay less notice, and then the contractor's 7-day suspension notice, it really paints a picture of a system designed for speed, forcing rapid decisions about cash flow. It feels quite unique to construction.
Is quite specific, yes, and largely effective in its aims. I think the main thing to take away is just how much construction payment and recovery depends on sticking rigidly to these notice periods. You absolutely have to know which notice applies when, what needs to be in it, and treat those deadlines as completely fixed.
And stepping back, the reason for all these detailed rules in the HGCRA and the later LDEDC Act amendments It's really about trying to keep money flowing in an industry that historically struggled with payment delays and disputes, isn't it?
Precisely. It's about providing some certainty and regularity to payments, trying to avoid situations where contractors or subcontractors are left high and dry for long periods. Every single deadline we've talked about today has real, immediate legal force behind it.
So maybe a final thought for you listening to this. How does your organization currently treat an application for payment when it lands?
Yeah, is it just seen as another invoice to be processed eventually? Or is it treated from day one as a kind of legal trigger, something that starts a mandatory clock requiring immediate, legally compliant assessment and response? Because if you're not geared up to react properly within those first 5 days, you're already on the back foot. The time to figure out your position and prepare for a potential pay less notice isn't after the clock has already run down significantly. It needs thinking about before that AFP even arrives.